is one of the legendary bands from Madison in the 70s. On bass guitar, that's right, he's possibly one of the top 4 or 5 most spectacular human beings I personally know. Brian Sherrill on bass, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I'm talking about. On the drums, once again, you know I'm partial there. Just a legend on the music scene. You all know him. He's played in several different bands from the 70s through today. This just happens to be, let me get out of the way, Little Vito on drums. To my right, this is a purebred Madison guitar player. He's the only guy I personally know who made Cher cry. Gil Jepney, ladies and gentlemen.
I love you, Madison.
He's purebred. To my left, your right, depending upon how you're standing, what angle, the gentleman who truly is a legend in the Madison scene, recently was awarded Madison's best guitar player at the Mamas, a friend, a brilliant player, a wonderful person. Ladies and gentlemen, John Massino. And give it up for Punch!
It was just automatic that it was going to be good because we had a certain formula.
First guitar was a plastic guitar that I won selling Christmas cards. It was really cheap.
It was a Silver Sparkle Ludwig club date, and I had to make a deal with my mom for it. Her dad was a band director, kind of like Doc Severinsen for The Tonight Show. So she said, listen, if you play trumpet, or cornet at the time, all the way through high school, I will go and co-sign on it for a drum set for you, and then you can pay it off with your paper route.
A Telecaster bass with a jazz neck. Bought it the night of the 10 Years After concert. Bought it from Ray Kettner at Ward Broad on Henry Street. Brought it home, opened up the case, looked at it, shut the case, and then went to the concert.
My first guitar was a Gibson SG that my brother had, and he handed that down to me. I was walking down State Street one day, and I heard this guitar playing coming out of a guitar shop, and I thought the lead actually, at the time, I thought it sounded like Hendrix, and I went in, and it was Gil playing. And
I was channeling Hendrix at the time.
Well, you were playing some real good Hendrix riffs, and I'll never forget that. But that was one of the first times, I think, that I heard Gil.
Ray Kettner, who was at the time working at Ward Broad, said, you ought to check this guy out. Because Ray had no idea who I was, but Gil would always go in and, was plunking around on guitars and stuff like that.
I had an old Sears Silvertone that had 2 12s and made a cabinet about the size of a refrigerator.
This kid comes over. It was virtually one of the first rehearsals we ever had. When he put the head on top of it, I could barely reach the knobs. I mean, it was just the biggest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I thought, this guy's gonna rock, you know?
I started 8th grade at E.G. Cromery grade school, and shortly after that I met John Massino. I'd always heard John talk about this band, Arbor Vitae, and one day they were gonna play at a gig at E.G. Cromery, and that was the first time I ever saw Gil and Rich, and they were just amazing. They started out with that song, Feelin' All Right. Gil had this Telecaster, and he was just an amazing front man, and Rich was super solid on the drums, and it was really impressive. The next phase after Arbor Vitae was an addition of a new bass player, and I'd heard of this guy, Gail Barkas, and was supposed to be really good, and then I heard that Gail had a brother named Bruce, who was an amazing guitar player, and he was going to join the band. And the first gig I saw them play with Bruce was the cafeteria at Middleton High School, and I'd have to say that the hype on Bruce was, if anything, understated. I was completely blown away. You know, when he would do a part, it would be so exact to the record if they were doing a cover song. He reminded me a lot of Johnny Winter.
Actually ended up doing the roadie soundman thing, carrying SVTs in a Ford Econoline van for all the Kentucky Fried Chicken I could eat.
Yeah.
They were just so good. From the first time I saw them play, it was such a good fit.
He had sat out in front of us for so long.
He
knew all the songs. I mean, it was just like, wow.
When John Messino and I had heard that Punch was moving into this house on the corner of University Avenue, they had just picked the name Punch, and we had just heard that was going to be the new name of the band that had been East Main, now that they had added Brian. And we went over to the house, and no one was there, but we looked through the windows, and I remember seeing Rich's drum set up in the living room, and that was the first time I ever saw the Punch logo. I think it was painted on his drum case.
The first place I saw Punch play was at the Church Key. You know, we're all at work at McMillan and Clary, calling up every bar we can contact, calling up colleges, cold calling people, trying to get them to book these bands that we were working with. And JR comes in and says, I'm handling a new band I want you all to see. Okay, so we all go down. They're called Punch. And when they came out and did their 45-minute set, it was mind-boggling. I mean, none of us had ever seen Bruce's guitar playing that was similar to what Eddie Van Halen would be doing, we'd be seeing a year later. And that was just amazing, because he just effortlessly flew through all those harmonic things and hammer-ons, and and it was so fluid, and he was so young, and it was just really a blast. It just took your head off. And Gil's vocals, it was like Rick Derringer and Johnny Winter combined, and he's just a little guy up there with this big, huge voice. And the rhythm section, like Richie and Brian, were like really solid. I mean, it was just like seeing a solid bar band, but with a phenomenal vocalist and a phenomenal guitar player. It was just like, what the heck is this?
Don't you know that I was sitting back in Texas? I was playing on rhythms, and I got a big offer for more money than I could refuse. I had my chance of making it, playing anything I wanted to play. Playing back in my mind, I could hear the people say, keep playing that rock and roll, keep doing what you've been told, save your money up for when you get old, got to keep playing rock and roll.
The way the scene was evolving between 73 and 76 was bar bands ruled. Illinois at the time was 21, Wisconsin was 18, so people would come across the border. So we had lots of border towns that were booking bands. McMillan and Clary Talent started doing most of the bar bands at the time. They were cover bands. They were playing 3 sets a night, 5 nights a week in bars, everywhere from Wisconsin straight through to North and South Dakota. We'd send them to Rhinelander. We'd send them everywhere.
If Punch played, 300 people showed up.
Right, and they were there for the band.
And they were there for Punch.
Not for the liquor.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Everybody went. It didn't matter what you were. If you were the quarterback on the football team or if you were a cheerleader, you went and saw live music. And that was probably the golden age of Madison local music. You know, you can have 20 people at a gig, and that's considered a halfway decent night now.
The scene was alive. People were interested. It was their entertainment choice for the evening. I had a talk with Steve Lethan one day, who's the owner of Good and Loud, and went in the store, and Steve used to be the sound man for Clicker, another popular local band. And Steve said, tell him, he's talking about his staff in the music store. He says, tell him how it used to be here, how you could go see Punch on a Friday night and Clicker on a Saturday night, or vice versa, and each band would have 1,000 people. Because my kids who work here just don't believe it, because it's not like this anymore.
Church key would be packed. You couldn't even. I remember my father-in-law being there and dropping change on the floor and just saying, "Screw it, I can't bend down and get it because it's too packed."
El Tejon was one
would
of them.
always be hot and sweety and packed to the
Shuffle.
Yeah, the Shuffle In,
Boardwalk.
the Boardwalk.
Headliners.
Oh, the Stone Hearth for sure.
Yeah.
It didn't matter when we played, if it was a Monday night or a weekend night. Those people would be there.
Punch was one of those bands that once you were exposed to it, you kept coming back. I mean, we could put them for 5 nights in Fargo, North Dakota, and the place would be full with 700 people every night. Punch was that good. They draw from 100 miles away.
I think there were quite a few Punch fans that probably we didn't know about, that we were getting bigger and bigger, and we didn't know it. Although, personally, I always felt that every gig that we did topped the gig previously.
During that period, I would have been in Cynthia and the Soul Asylum, and then in the band Baby Fat. We had some meetings with some record companies, and they were offering a contract. And at the time, our singer said we weren't ready, and we passed on it. And I was really young, probably 16, 17 years old.
I do remember Punch playing at, was it the Civic Center for Jesus Christ Superstar? Now that rocked.
The Broadway musical had been out, and it made it to film, and then I think it was MATC produced it, and we all went to see it. And the big draw was Punch was the rock band that was going to be involved in it.
Because I was going to MATC at the time, their new college singer group was doing Jesus Christ Superstar, which is virtually a rock opera written for a rock and roll band and add a real orchestra. Because the director of the choir thought, well, hey, we got this rock band here. They asked if we wanted to do it.
He wanted an already formed rock group for the show, so it sounded like a real cohesive unit as opposed to just musicians playing the sheet music.
The written scores,
Yeah.
like, this thick. But you open it up and it has like a couple of notes, and then it says, ad lib for 400 measures.
As I remember, when we rehearsed, the director said, well, you don't have to do it exact.
I think we burned up about 2 or 3 of those albums, just kind of virtually memorizing the music off the album, right? Yeah. But I had to sit there and count all the measures because we were dealing with, an orchestra, 40-person choir, all that kind of stuff.
And a conductor, Peter Taboris.
And a conductor, yeah.
It was nerve-wracking. I had to start the show with that little
He did learn it, note for note.
leg would be just shaking like this.
I think after that, the local scene opened up to the group even more. I think the group got a little bit more notoriety, a little bit more clout for doing that. Just not a bunch of young rock and roll boys.
We actually thought about taking that on the show, or on the road. I mean, taking that show on the road because we had built a stage.
Oh, yeah.
It was pretty elaborate.
One of the stars, Judas, ended up being Tom Wopat from the Dukes of Hazzard. he had just been released from Clicker, and he did have a killer voice.
Yep.
And at that point, we were trying to hone where our music was going to go, and I probably did talk him into it. I just said, well, hey, we can develop behind this voice.
Think I'll stay around, 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 around.
He just had an amazing voice, and I remember seeing him with Clicker, and when he was with Clicker, it was just, I think, totally different Clicker. I thought his showmanship was good. I thought he was just he was just a cool guy up on stage. They just looked like they shouldn't be local. They just should be coming in to play a show, once a year at the Coliseum.
We backed up Mahogany Rush with Frank. It wasn't billed as Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush. It was just Mahogany Rush. And they were touring with Queen at that time. And so this was one of Queen's off nights. So they were headlining and we backed them up. Mark Everest was singing with the group at that time. But I remember being in the dressing room before they went on and him mentioning, man, y'all do Queen better than Queen. We just laughed it off. But they were backing him up. So. But I remember having to tune Frank Marino's guitar because he said, man, I can't tune my guitar, man. Can you tune it for me?
There were two bands that, if you were in the scene, that you had to see. One was Clicker, the other one was Punch. Honestly, they were the two.
Well, and Chunky Pie.
We were looking for a new singer to add to Chunky Pie, and we went to Wisconsin Dells to see these two guys doing a duo. And it was Robin Zander and Brian Beebe. They were playing on the Strip in the Dells, and they just playing acoustic guitars, and we watched them, and then we left, and we passed on both of them. And it's not that they weren't good, but they were doing like Elton John songs, and we didn't think either one was a good match for us. Within months, Cheap Trick replaced their singer Zeno with Robin, and so the next time we saw Robin, his hair was cut, he had new clothes on, and we were just amazed that
transformation.
Yeah, we passed up on one of the greatest rock singers,
At the time, I felt like I still needed to develop as more of a musician and just experiment with new styles and just learn more, and I guess just to play with more musicians.
Punch was then looking for a new lead guitar player, and they put ads out, and a number of people tried out.
So when Bruce was leaving, it was almost like I was like, why don't they just ask John? I mean, they know all the same songs.
We went and saw Chunky Pie at
the Boardwalk.
At the Boardwalk.
Okay, well.
And I remember Mark, in a drunken kind of stupor, just saying, let's go for it.
Tom Hennick became our mentor / booking agent. And it worked out to our advantage because there was a craving for our band. We'd go out on the road for weeks at a time or whatever. And then when we'd come back to town, it was like, haven't seen you in a while, boys, and it ended up being a big deal whenever we came back. Yeah, Tom Hennick did do a really good job.
When I came into the band and Mark was there, I remember shows that were really powerful with the five of us.
Yeah, when you have the music, you just can't sit still. Your brother will rock, sister will. Come on, everybody!
It was us, Head East, and Ted.
Yeah. Yep.
And stuck around for Head East because we had actually bumped into their manager down at Haymakers.
Yeah.
And got advanced listenings of their album before it came out. Remember, we went out to the band car, and he's got to hear this band.
Yeah.
And then when Ted played at the Capitol Theater, it was 140 decibels at the board.
He was knocking plaster off the
People
ceiling.
were physically getting sick. It was so loud. It was even,
The Fender Twins and the Showman.
Showman,
Bottoms.
It was just, it was really, really bad.
The camaraderie between us was much tighter than it was with us and then Mark out front. What he did for us is realize that we were stronger as a four-piece.
That's not taking anything against Mark or anything like that, but Mark was more like a Beatles guy, and Gil was more like a combination of Who guy and a Foghat guy or something.
Gil was reluctant. He really did not want to be that guy, but through constant shoving and
We pushed him out.
We pushed him out there. We did. It was just, but he ended up being.
That's where I learned how to scream.
Yeah, yeah.
Everyone seems kind of silly to me, running around, never trying to see, looking for help in the telephone book, always trying to find the invisible hook. Whole lot of talking, no I try to find, but anyway to get a piece of mind. But then one thing went accidentally, I came across a man who found out it was me. Uncomplicated, so simple. Uncomplicated, what I am. Uncomplicated, I'm easy. Uncomplicated, well it's as easy as that. If you wanna be free, well you can swim like a fish in the bottom of the sea. You keep on a rock until the day you die, but you never, never, ever, ever wonder why. Well, some folks live when they're out on a limb. If they went too far, they must get back in. Well, don't you get scared when you see yourself. Thank the Lord that you ain't nobody else.
You can't just name one of their strengths. They all had something to do with our career. We couldn't do the show without them, and they were right there. And boy, if anybody was going to give us static, they would be the buffers.
Hannibal Steve Hayes, quite a character. Steve Hayes, he would fight for the group. Someone would mention Punch sucks, and he'd get in a fist fight with him.
We didn't pay them real well, but they were there in spirit because it was one for all for one.
They worked hard.
They did work hard.
Was it Mike Sharp or Hannibal?
Well, they probably both did, but I remember
Yeah.
Mike Sharp getting nailed by one too, and going off in his face at the boardwalk. Actually, what happened, I think, with Mike Sharp, he had loaded the flash powder in, and then plugged it in, didn't realize the switch was on.
turned,
and
yeah.
So it went off at just some random spot.
You hear the wall of sound Punch used to use. It was just, great compression, great amps, great ability to control the sound in the room they were in.
They really paid a lot of attention to their overall sound, and when you'd go to see them, you would know it was them, because of the quality of the sound out in the audience. They didn't, cut any corners.
Today, this is all very simple stuff, but in those days, you were pioneering everything, and everything was custom built. You didn't go to the store to buy it. We built our own audio snakes. We built our own cabling. We built our own racks to hold the amplifiers.
We were using phase linear 700 amps at that time.
That was the amp of choice. They were all, a lot of them were hot rodded by me.
By you,
To
yeah.
power 8 ohm loads only, or you would get the nickname the Flame Linear.
I had two 18s, two 15s, phase linear 700. I had a Furman parametric with a Furman three-way crossover and a rain compressor, and then the MXR digital delay. So I had the stack, and then when we would play with the guys like Head East, their sound man would come up and look at my gear and just look. Nobody was doing that at that time.
Punch always had because they were a guitar band, they always had the greatest guitar sounds.
We had that really solid sound, and we were trying.
We were in tune because we had a strobe tuner.
Madison, we had people like Ray Kettner who would get the good stuff for people.
Cats That Plays goes to Rays.
Goes to Rays, yeah.
The
Cats What Plays goes to Rays.
Ray Kettner was, he was like the just big brother uncle of all the musicians in town. If you were bored, you didn't have a gig, you stopped by Ray's and just hung out.
I'm sure that some of these other bands were created because of Ray's input. Why don't you go try playing with this guy or whatever?
He gave everybody such bro deals. He would never make hardly any money on anybody, you know, and it made him pretty popular.
He would always, if you wanted to try out an amp or a guitar, let you take it for the weekend. It wasn't like have it back the next day. In fact, I took an Ampeg VT40 once on the road with me and brought it back 4 months later, and he didn't blink an eye.
He taught me a lot about doing intonation, and he had all the tips.
Used to give me all any guitar tips about intonation on guitars and stuff like that, anything you wanted to know. If the guitar wouldn't stay in tune, he'd show you little tricks how to do it, so he's just your musician's best friend in town.
Somebody knock a Les Paul over, crack the head off, and you want to cry, but Ray could piece it back together almost like new.
When I bring my Fenders in to get fixed, he'd say, get a real guitar, get a Gibson. I kept saying to Ray, I want humbucking pickups on my Strat. And he said, nobody does that. He put 3 humbucking pickups and the pickups phase switch in it. And that was really before you would see a humbucking on a Strat. He had a Gibson SG that someone broke the headstock. He cut the headstock off, and he made one of the first guitars that had the tuners down here. And we had a little plaque made up that said the Ray. We called it the Ray. Mark Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola's nephew, he owns the Ray now.
Ray is one guy that's definitely going to heaven. Yep, he's going to be in rock and roll heaven for sure.
Really like Ray and really respect him, and he was very instrumental to that period of Madison's music scene.
Yeah.
Big time.
Before,
Big time.
I mean, Ward Brought was corporate, and he bucked the system a little bit, and that's why he left and went on his own. But now it is almost all corporate music stores, except for a few here and there. But you'll never replace a Ray Kettner.
I started Isthmus with Vince O'Hearn and Fred Milverstadt. I was at the very first meeting. We all sat down and said, we need a publication for the town that tells what's going on culturally in the town. We all agreed, great. I was going to do the music part. Well, after about 3 months, and they're giving me like this much space for music, saying there's nothing going on in Madison, I said, sorry, I'm going to start the Mad City Music Sheet. I think one of the best things we ever did was we made Madison look like it was a national stage, and that the groups here mattered. By the time I had the Mad City Music Sheet up to its full peak, in my opinion, I wanted to do a free concert, and I picked Olin Park. Every act on that show was the best that we had in town at the time. Everybody from Ben Sidran to Spooner to Four Chairs to Punch. And the reason Punch ended the show, Punch was the most dynamic band that deserved to be on the national stage that we had here. I mean, they were ready to go. That show was one of the best shows they ever did. And the crowd loved them, no two ways about it. We had a big crowd by that time.
Michael St. John, put so much effort into those interviews for the band.
Yeah, they really did do a good job. Both Chronicle and the Music Sheet, they did a great job of covering our career.
All of a sudden, Madison was so important, it had 2 music publications competing.
was a big show.
There are actual T-shirts made for that show.
Yeah.
We had attitudes. We wanted to make it hard for Rick to follow us. We went out of our way that day. At that point in time, we were firing on all 4 cylinders.
I read in a Cream magazine or something that he was a tennis player, so we invited him. Sure, he played tennis, and then he actually came over to my apartment. I just remember him coming in. Bonnie's on the phone talking to somebody, and she goes, "Oh my God, it's Rick Derringer coming into our house." And he walks in, and he just starts going through the cupboards looking for, he just made himself totally at home. It was like, it's all totally cool.
Because we liked Derringer's music, we could virtually play whole albums of his stuff because those licks were such cool licks, and we learned them all.
The band used to do a song called Let Me In, which is a Rick Derringer song, and it turned out that the echo needed to be 2 counts behind the band, and that required 2 echoplexes in series to get enough delay time to accomplish the mission.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Punch and Cheap Trick were the 2 big local groups that you would go to see, and they were by far, on the circuit, the most popular bands. They had the same agent too, Adamantian Toller.
Thank you.
Once in a while, you'd see a Cheap Trick member in the audience at a Punch show. For example, we used to play the Top Deck in Lake Geneva, and I remember sitting out there one night and turning around, there's Bunny standing there watching the band.
I remember one time being in Rockford and seeing Nielsen out dancing with his wife to our band.
Started getting to know their road crew. Jolly, I think, was their road manager. And in fact, we had a band house, and at times he'd bring over a couple of Rick Nielsen's guitars, see if we could let them stay at the Punch house while they went on the road, because they didn't want to take them on the road. So that was sort of cool.
The Punch guys, when they opened for Cheap Trick, were really impressive. They played really well that night, and it was cool to see them on the same bill with Cheap Trick. It's just like old home week for me. I just went to that show, and I was in heaven. Cheap Trick guys have always been Punch fans.
The promoter was treating us like scum. I mean, it's just like, get away from me. You might get a sound check, you might not, or whatever. And Rick ran into John and saw this little broom closet that they gave us for a dressing room and went right up to the promoter and said, look, these guys get the same kind of food, same kind of beverages we do, or we're not going on. And like that, it was like rock star backstage.
Kirk Dyer came out, and the way I remember it, with that huge voice that Kirk has, he said, just off the Rolling Stones tour, Punch.
Yeah.
And the crowd went
nuts.
Lighters
went up right away.
And I think that we all kind of glanced at each other like, just off the Rolling Stones
Yeah, I kind of love that.
It was a good show, though. If they wanted us back, they wouldn't let us do an encore.
No, they would not let us do an encore. But
Don was bringing in songs, Gil was bringing in songs, and Punch started adding more of the original songs to the show.
It was very difficult to go out and play original material and have audiences like you, especially when you're so well known for doing these great cover versions of all these songs.
Whatever covers they did, you would swear it was not a cover, but the actual artist.
I mean, I think they were that good that it was that hard to tell the difference between, you know, what was theirs and what wasn't. And that's the mark of a pretty darn good band.
All these songs that you're hearing are our own songs written by everybody in the band. Here's a song that John wrote, John Messino on lead guitar.
The songs these guys wrote, especially the originals they wrote, were always very strong songs. I do recall that, and I recall really good vocals, really good rhythms, really good choruses especially. That was real catchy tunes.
I know where I was when I wrote Everybody Loses at Love because it took 5 minutes. It was one of those moments where it just came out.
You start to realize when you're playing 4 or 5 nights a week that the weeks are flitting by, but everything seems to be moving in slow motion. And so Gil wrote a song about that.
Going Fast Slowly, it was more of a message song, you know, with the lyrics.
Drink until morning. What you drink. When you accelerate too fast, how do you expect to last? Behind
That one comes to mind immediately because that one is all about what weekly life is like with a rock and roll band.
To me, it felt like kind of a message about, you know, what we were kind of living through at that time.
Everything's moving along, but not a whole lot's happening with our, you know,
Yeah.
the band was doing well, but we were kind of, were we going somewhere?
Yeah.
Going fast.
This guy had a Dodge Super Bee. Remember the old
yes,
Super
yes.
Bees? And he just loved the song, so he had this black Super Bee, and he painted "Going Fast Slowly" in pink letters on the side of this car.
in that time, making a record was just like an enormous step from being a local band or even a regional band. That was something very few people got to do. And a record, contract was like, flying to the moon.
We laid down some basic tracks, and they had Rich do some drum overdubs that I think at the time we were probably thinking that's not the right way to, we don't want to overdub drum rolls.
It was weird having Robin McBride all of a sudden in the mix, because we'd never worked with him before. I don't think he'd ever seen us before. I don't think he
didn't have any idea about what we sound, what we were like. Like, this guy had just got a gold record from doing the Ohio Players.
Yeah.
Now the Ohio Players, Punch. Okay, wait a minute.
So-
So but he
wasn't
had a
pro.
name. He had a name, which is why Ken wanted to.
Well, I think he was looking to branch out into rock and roll a little bit more, and we were just convenient.
Wind up your weekend tonight with a power-packed punch of rock and roll. On stage tonight at Headliners, it's Mad City's favorite rockers, Punch. Come on in early to grab your spot in the dance floor and get ready for a hot night of heavy rockin' music. When it comes to dynamite, up against the wall rock and roll, Punch can't be beat. Send your weekend out in style. Party tonight with Punch at Headliners, 626 University Avenue.
One of the biggest developments was developing the Palms in Milwaukee. When we started playing there, it was called the Electric Ballroom, and we, for quite a while, were going there practically every Thursday night. And at first we had almost nothing for crowd. Eventually they hooked us up with a Milwaukee radio station. And we opened for some national acts. For example, we opened for Canned Heat, we opened for Steppenwolf. And those shows went out as live radio broadcasts from the Electric Ballroom.
Live from the Electric Ballroom at 26th and State on GMF 98. You're listening to Madison's Punch, and you've still got about an hour until Canned Heat comes on stage.
After we did those shows, then things really started to turn around for Punch in Milwaukee. And where we had started out with maybe 100 people in the club, after a while we were getting 1,000 people in the nightclub.
But I remember the four of us in the band car, and disco hit.
Ooh.
And disco was like something that I think at that time we were talking about it and how it was affecting us in the clubs.
All us working musicians hated disco. It took the lights and the attention off the band and put it on the dancers on the floor.
Disco was something that happened to us that had an effect on.
It knocked us. It virtually knocked us out of Chicago.
They put a ball up and pay a guy $50 to spin records. So they didn't need to pay $300 for a band when that seems pretty darn cheap. And people would still pay the same cover price and come in and dance to records.
At the same time, punk was just starting.
The demands that were put on every band around that time to conform to this or that style of music, it was confusing a little bit about which way music was really going to be going.
We had actually played this nightclub, the Electric Ballroom, on a regular basis. Well, this particular night, all these people wanted to see. They didn't care about us. They wanted to see the Boomtown Rats. And I remember this guy quite vividly. He had a pierced nose and like orange hair. He didn't want to hear what we had to do. He was standing on a table, flipping us off, screaming, "Get the F off stage."
Yeah,
right?
It was a punk crowd.
It was a punk crowd, early punk, And we had a 90-minute show planned, and I'll bet we did it in like 65 minutes. We were whipping through it. By the time we hit Won't Get Fooled Again, we had gotten to them. These guys wanted an encore. But they had to clear the stage because the Rats had to come on. Well, anyway, there's no way out from and back. So they had to get a bouncer, and then like Gil, and then a bouncer, and Rye. We had to be escorted out of the club, and the roadies had to wait until the whole concert was done before they could get the gear out.
Out of all the bands that all these guys have been in over the years, Punch is still my favorite lineup. Now, granted, bands changed. Cheap Trick even went through a couple lineup changes over the years I was with him.
It was a hard situation, I think, for those guys. They're playing without John. John's a legend, you know.
We put out an ad
in Rolling
Stone when John left and to find a replacement. We put out an ad in Rolling Stone, actually, and had people fly out from
everywhere.
Colorado, I think.
Palo Alto, California, New Orleans. I mean, we actually auditioned 52 guitar players.
We auditioned Alien Probe, I believe, at the Bamboo Room up in Green Bay.
Green Bay, yes.
And he came in, and he was kind of quirky, and he had a organ and a couple Leslies as well to throw into the mix. So all around, he was like a pretty interesting replacement. So we ended up hiring him.
Looking good out there, the few of us. All right,
Gunner's got a stage presence, and he's a great creative guitar player, and he had kind of that English, maybe Stones, Small Faces kind of a feel to it. And again, I think anytime Punch would try and change somebody, that I think would have been a good shot. Gunner would have been a good shot.
So we end up with Gunner, who had been to Europe with another band. I mean, Gunner had some really great songs. Killer songs.
Kind of Todd Rundgren-ish.
Kind of Todd.
Writing all the parts, singing and playing all the parts, and he did some impressive stuff with a 2-track band.
Oh, all around town, such exciting generations. Style and class, moving's off the mass, moving on wild vacation. Cuckoo nighttime, feel alright. Shuffle down the street, pick up on the sides. Cuckoo nighttime, full of life. Gonna find a cuckoo woman tonight.
Unfortunately, they were put into places that, was not going to help their career, not going to make them big. And I think that's what led to the breakup. I don't think any of them were prepared to be in a bar band for the rest of their lives.
JD's White Elephant.
Yeah. I choose not to remember that one because I have this wonderful picture of Gil in the air at Summerfest. That's the one that I remember. That go out on a high note. We had 2 more shows to do, like a weekend in Monroe, Wisconsin.
Kind of walked out at the end of the night, and
yeah, it's come to this.
It was very anticlimactic.
Yeah,
especially at JD's.
Yeah, it wasn't a good gig. There weren't, the crowd wasn't good. There was nothing good about it.
The bottom line is, you make great music when you got great people around you. And these guys had everything, all the basics were there, all the tools were there.
The one and only.
Gil was a very solid front man, had great charisma, and his singing was amazing.
In my opinion, I think he was like the strongest singer that I've ever seen in Madison. He had pipes like I've never seen.
Stay strong.
First time I ever saw Gil play, I think I was about 16, and I thought he was a total original player. I just loved the way he played.
He could front any band that he so desired to. He was my front man.
You have to have that singing instrumentalist combo of excitement. So when the singer is in the front singing like Gil was, you know, you were just drawn to him, but then he could step back and John could step out, and you know, I think every good group has that. You know, Daltrey, Townsend, Jagger, Richards.
Is one of the nicest human beings you could ever meet. And you wouldn't expect that when you saw him on stage back then. He had the big hair, and he had the monster guitar and the dynamic voice, and you just think that he was like, you know, set to be a rock star.
Solid drummer, more talented than Ringo, more chops than Ringo.
Rich is just an unbelievably tight drummer.
Rich really knew how to tune drums, still does know how to tune drums very well, and that had a lot to do with Punch's sound, a great snare drum sound, and a solid kick and everything.
I always liked how he fit into the band, but always wanted to replace him in the band someday.
Good musician, good drummer, good solid drummer, good rock drummer. Really easy to play with, a big part of the Punch sound.
Rich, who is a complete survivor, Rich has been a musician pretty much all of his life. It's his blood. It's just who he is. It's what he does.
What's the funniest thing that's ever happened at a gig?
Funniest thing? Well,
I know.
Where do I start? Yeah, we've had a lot of funny stuff happen. One of them was with the band Punch back in the late 70s, and we were playing at the Church Key down on Park and University. And as we played the song Won't Get Fooled Again, our drummer, Little Vito, right at the end of Won't Get Fooled Again, he actually fell off the back of the stage into the bathroom.
No way!
And the door opened and closed, and he basically just
disappeared,
dematerialized.
Just was gone.
He was just gone. And the band looked around, and they were like, "Where'd he go?"
Yeah, he's gone.
He was also a really, really excellent singer, not just a backup singer, just an excellent voice.
There he is. There he is.
There, Vito. We got a song for you.
Big round of applause for Lil Vito.
Over the years, he's an overall entertainer. He does it all. He does the business and the music end, and he's a great drummer. He plays, he makes a song work.
Lil Vito! Brian Skirl and bass guitar. Give him a hand.
Solid bass, just dead on. You know, the shirt said it all, more bass, and I couldn't agree more. I always wanted more bass.
Solid.
That's the thing about Brian, is he was solid.
Rock solid.
Brian had a really nice sound for his bass.
Loved his experimentation with equipment. Could never keep him in one set of gear for very long. It used to drive me crazy. Now what?
Very precise, very clean, and he spent a lot of time getting his tone just right.
His style really covers so many different styles.
Brian and I think we're a wonderful rhythm section. When my snare drum hand came down, that note was going to be there.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Messino.
John was a child prodigy on guitar, and just amazed everybody who saw him play, and everybody knew he was definitely gonna be famous for playing guitars.
Just always been one of those 1 in 10, maybe 50 million unbelievable natural talents. And at the same time, one of the nicest people you would ever want to meet.
You just try, do what you can. The syndrome of an average man.
They were the band that you looked up to. Well, John was the guitar player that you looked up to. Going to see John play in whatever band he was in has always been pretty much a clinic of just guitar tricks and styles.
If he is not the best damn guitar player in this area, he's in the top 2, okay? Need I say more? That's it. So, you know what? He's had some of the best bands this town has ever known. He's been around for a long time, played with other very great guitar players over the years.
Really, he was Eddie Van Halen before Eddie Van Halen. There's no reason he's not up there with any big name.
What Eddie Van Halen made popular, brought, and it was like, stuff like that. John had that down like smoking. Actually, I saw him doing it before I saw Van Halen. He got that done really early.
Speed demon guitar player.
He's sort of the quintessential rock and roll guitar player, the most skilled player. I've heard him play incredibly tasty stuff. I've heard him do a lot of really speedy stuff. And not to mention that he's really a heck of a good singer as well, and a good songwriter.
John and the guitar riffs and Gil with the vocals and rhythm guitar, and those guys could trade riffs pretty good on stage. If they did a lead thing, it was awesome.
Punch, they should have been stars. They should have been stars.
At the time, too, though, there were a couple bands that he had, because he had Off-Broadway. Maybe 3 or 4 of us in the running, but Cheap Trick was that was the one he went with.
Yep. We saw Cheap Trick make it, and we all, I think, wondered who was going to be next. For me personally, I really wanted it to be Punch. They were my band, and they were part of my my childhood and growing up, and influenced me so tremendously as a musician, even to this day. Man, I wanted them to make it. I always wonder what could have been.
They owned Madison as far as, you know, a rock and roll band.
Over the history of bands in Madison, you know, from like 1970 on, Punch stands out as one of the very best bands. And for their type of music that really, you know, kick-ass rock and roll, they were definitely the best.
Between the 4 or 5 guys that were in and out of that band, Punch, you've got a musical who's who of rock and roll in this area. South Central Wisconsin for sure. Those guys are respected statewide, area-wide, region-wide. And I can't see anybody that knows anything about the music business not wanting to book them for another set.
We were lucky to be able to see them when they were young, and we were lucky to see them the other day. You know, they still totally kicked ass. Totally. It was like stepping back in time.
All right, Wisconsin! Please welcome Madison's greatest rock and roll band, Punch!
Long live Punch.